Welcome into the ACSA Speaker Series. I'm Michael Kelly. On the road this week in Humboldt County, visiting with Peninsula Union School District Superintendent Principal Lark Doolan. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Sure, thanks for being here.
This is an interview we've wanted to do for a while. You made news 2 years ago when you became the first openly transgender public school superintendent in the country.
That we know of.
So let's start with this. What have the last 2 years been like for you?
They've been amazing. I've been met with a lot of love and care in my community, and things have gone pretty smoothly overall. And it's just great to be living a more authentic version of myself.
You have not done a ton of media interviews since you've come out. You told your story to a local blog in Eureka after telling your school board, your students, the parents of those students. What led to the decision to come out?
Well, it's been a long journey for me moving towards my transition. And when I realized that it was time for me to take this step in my life, I realized that as a public figure, it was going to impact not just myself. As a school leader, it was going to impact my students and their families and my staff. And so I did my best to be conscientious about the impact, to minimize any negative impact for my school as much as possible, and create as much harmony in the process.
Let's go back a little bit. Let's talk about your background. Born and raised in Berkeley, you were telling me off camera, a pretty vibrant town with a lot of different points of view.
Yeah, Berkeley's an amazing place, and I feel really fortunate to have been raised there. Berkeley's a place where, from a young age, I learned it's okay to be different, and that our diversity is our strength. And so that's been a core value of me throughout my life, that human diversity is an asset, not something to be tolerated, but something to be celebrated and valued. And in a lot of ways, that created a foundation for my life and learning how to accept myself as someone who doesn't fit into the gender I was assigned at birth.
What was school like for you?
Well, I went to Berkeley Public Schools and I loved them. I got to learn with a diverse range of peers, international peer group, and I liked school more or less. It had its moments, like most kids, I think. But I had some really powerful and influential teachers that inspired me and taught me things that I continue to use to this day.
Any bullying?
Well, I think gender is something that our society has a very binary approach to, and there are a lot of media messages and implicit kind of biases worked throughout school curriculum, and a lot, it's hard to live outside of that. So growing up, I didn't have transgender role models. I didn't meet a transgender person that I knew of until after college, and so I didn't really have an adult that I could look at and be like, that's how I want to be when I grow up, and that's something that kids today have access to, with transgender people being more visible in the community, and people like me being out. It creates an opportunity for kids to see representations of themselves in the world at an earlier age.
How challenging was it back then?
Well, there was a certain level of gender policing that went on. If I didn't, fit into the societal expectations of what a girl is supposed to be, there were ways that my peer group would regulate that and teach me that, oh no, that's not okay, and this kind of gender deviation isn't okay, and so that was hard, and I internalized a lot of that, which I think is part of why even after I met other transgender people, it took me a while to kind of work out, yes, this is me.
Yeah. You came up to Humboldt County, went to school at Humboldt State. Simple question, why Humboldt?
I love the rain, and it's a temperate rainforest up here. Yeah. I was really excited to go to school somewhere that has such a rich ecological life. The redwoods and the rivers and the ocean really create a unique biosphere, and I was drawn to that.
How much did your childhood shape your decision to go into education in the first place?
I come from a family of educators.
Okay.
So most people in my family have taught or do teach currently, mostly at the college level, but also elementary schools and middle schools. And I think that my family's valuing of education definitely impacted my decision to want to be an educator.
Explain to the people who are watching this and listening to this, what is Humboldt County like?
Humboldt County is a really magical and special place. I get to see the ocean every day. I get to walk on the beach with my dog and sometimes not see other people. It's not a very crowded place. We're far enough from the Bay Area and Portland. We're kind of right between San Francisco and Portland, that we don't have the numbers of people that city life has. And I really enjoy knowing my grocer, right? Like the guy I buy olives from. Like I know his name. Like it's fun to be part of a community where there's the level of intimacy that's possible in a small town.
That makes sense. As I said, born and raised in Berkeley, went to school in Humboldt County. You live in Humboldt County. Safe to say, more accepting, more progressive parts of the country?
Well, I live in California. I mean, first,
fair. Let's start there. Right.
As someone who lives in California, I have a certain level of civil rights protection that's part of state law, and I'm aware that plenty of transgender people in other part of the country don't have anti-discrimination protection for housing or job, right? So just living in California gives me a certain level of empowerment, and I'm less disenfranchised than I might be in other parts of the country. Add on top of that Berkeley and Alameda County is a relatively supportive place. San Francisco has been known for a long time as a place for LGBT people to celebrate themselves and feel safe, which isn't to say that there aren't problems that happen there even. Humboldt County is a little bit more socially conservative than where I grew up, and so that's definitely been something I've learned how to navigate living here. Humboldt County is very liberal in some ways and very conservative in others.
So let me ask the follow-up. If you grew up in a more conservative part of the country, are we having a different conversation, or are we having this conversation in the first place?
Well, the decision to come out is really personal,
right.
And there's so many factors that play into it. Family acceptance, religious community acceptance, job security. I mean, the list goes on. And so it's impossible to really know what conversation we'd be having if I was from somewhere other than where I'm from. Yeah. But regardless of where I was born, I think I would be a transgender person. Yeah. The real question is whether I would be set up to be able to transition publicly. A lot of trans people choose to move away from wherever they're from, transition, and then move to a third place, and then just live as stealth, especially trans guys. And that wasn't the right path for me. Yeah. I love Humboldt, and I love my life here, and I'm not interested in living a stealth life where people don't know I'm transgender. It's an important part of who I am. Absolutely. And what informs me in the way I approach the world. And so for me, I chose to transition in the place where I live. And that's different than how some people choose to do it.
Did you start slowly? Did you start with family members and close friends? Or how did that process come to be?
For me, the coming out as transgender process started at a seafood restaurant in Berkeley when I was just out of college. Wow. I had met a couple of guys who were trans guys. They were the first trans people I had ever really met and known well. And we were having lunch, and one of them asked me my pronouns. And no one had ever asked me before. I'd been using she, her, hers as my pronouns my whole life. And I'd never really realized I had a choice around that. And so when he asked me, I kind of took a second and checked in with myself. And I said the first thing I thought, which is I'd like to try he. I'd like to know what that feels like. And then after that, I started kind of telling a few other close friends, like, hey, would you just try calling me he, just kind of just so I can feel how it feels. And I discovered it felt really good.
Liberating?
It was, I would beam. I could not help but smile and just feel so overwhelmingly joyful. And so I started telling more friends and just trusted people who I knew would be cool. And as more and more people started using he pronouns for me, other questions kind of started coming up. And I started to gradually come to realize that the way I described it was like, I'm a guy, but I'm in a woman's body. And I was okay with that for a while. And that wasn't something I felt a need to change for a while. And then at a certain point, I realized it would be really nice if the world saw me as I feel myself on the inside. And that's when I decided it was time to come out, to transition, to go through an individual process.
Pronouns might seem to some people as something so simple, but yet it has such an impact. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a huge part of the impact that pronouns have is directly a result of the gendered society we live in. We live in a society where we expect different things based on a person's pronouns. And so because our culture has such a distinct set of expectations for women and for men. And yes, that's definitely changed over the years, especially with various accomplishments in feminism. There's still ways that if I'm talking about a friend who you haven't met and I'm using a certain set of pronouns, there's a set of expectations and assumptions that goes with that. And so just by changing the pronoun, the assumptions shift, many of the assumptions are unconscious. And so by harnessing that, it's very powerful to change the way that we conceptualize other people just by changing their pronouns. So you're right, it's a small thing, but it makes a huge difference.
How much impact did you think that would have on you as a leader, as an educational leader?
Yeah, so I realized that it was time. I realized that I needed to do this for me, that it was the next step for me. And that was in September of 2016. And I spent some time reflecting on, okay, well, how do I do this? I realized that I wanted to transition medically as well as legally and socially. So all three. And every trans person navigates this in their own way, right? Some people just do legal or just do medical. There's a lot of options. For me, I decided that I wanted to do all three of those. And so when I realized that, I spent some time reflecting on the timeline. And I sat down, I kind of created a timeline of who I was going to tell when. As a superintendent of a school district, I knew that it would be a impactful thing, not just for me, but for my community. And so I wanted to be conscientious around that so it didn't negatively impact the students. I didn't want to be sloppy about it in a way that created disharmony for my school and for myself and for my students and their families and my staff and all of my stakeholders here. So I spent some time really reflecting on the order of operations. And in that process, I did some research, right? Like how to come out as transgender, right? So I did all the web searches, and I basically discovered that I didn't have a lot of role models for coming out as a school leader. So there were a lot of resources that says, well, first talk to your boss. And it's like, well, I am the boss, right? And, go to your HR department. Well, we're a small school district. I am the HR department. Yeah. And so I was looking, well, how do you come out to a board of directors, right? And I didn't find those resources. So I did my best to talk to other educators who had come out, teachers who had come out, to talk to whoever I could find who had more experience in this than I did, and then kind of to cobble together, a plan. It started with coming out to my family, which I did at Thanksgiving dinner, just kind of made hey, everyone. You know how I prefer he pronouns? Well, guess what? I'm going to be transitioning more publicly.
How did they take it?
Mostly very positively. Yeah, I'm fortunate to have a family who has been on this journey with me. Not everyone has a family who is on the journey with them. And my brother actually recently presented at a conference about being the brother of a transgender person. Wow. And so it's really nice to feel loved and supported and seen by my family of origin.
Yeah. Which is not always the case.
It's not always the case. Lots of LGBT people create chosen family, and I'm fortunate to also have a chosen family, but it's not from a place of necessity, the way many people have to create chosen family.
One of the things that I hear all the time from school administrators is this can be a lonely job. I can't even begin to imagine for someone in the LGBTQ community, especially transgender. We were talking off camera about this. It's not like there's a network for transgender administrators.
There's not a lot of us, but there is a network of LGBT administrators, right. And I'm usually the only T at the table, but I'm still around individuals who can relate in their own way. So once a year, I have dinner with other LGBT superintendents. And that brings me a lot of joy. It's nice to not be the only queer person in the room, and to be in a room where everyone gets it, at least on some level. Yeah. Even if my experience as a transgender person is different than their experiences, there's enough similarity.
When you first started going to those dinners, yeah. What was that like?
Oh, I was so happy. Yeah, I was just so happy to be. So here in Humboldt County, I'm the only. I'm pretty sure I'm the only out LGBT person in as a superintendent, and I have a lot of friends who are superintendents here in Humboldt who have been very supportive. But I'm often the only really actively, proactively out person in a room. And so once a year, getting to meet up with other superintendents, mostly from Southern California, is very, very nourishing for my spirit.
How has your own transition impacted your desire to advocate for LGBTQ students?
I've always been an advocate for LGBT students, even when I was one in middle school and onward. I've been pretty proactively involved in creating safe places in schools from the time I was a student, long before I ever started coming out of the closet.
Do you feel there's a greater responsibility now that you're out of the closet?
I don't. I do think there's a different level of scrutiny sometimes.
Okay.
But being a superintendent is a public role, so that's just part of the course.
California lawmakers have passed a number of protections for transgender students over the last few years. One thing to pass these protections, another thing to see these implemented. Mm-hmm. Have California school districts done enough?
Well, I would love to see more, and I also see a lot of people doing a lot of great work. So one of the things I've been doing for the last several years is teaching lessons to educators, professional development on the FAIR Act, which is an incredible piece of legislation about promoting diversity and making sure that social studies is representative of our population here in California, and that includes LGBT people. And so when teachers in social studies are legally being asked since January 1st, 2012, to teach about LGBT people and our contributions in California and beyond, then there are other questions that come up, right? You can't teach a social studies lesson on the contributions of LGBT people without being able to answer questions like, what does gay mean? At a variety of age levels. And a lot of teachers haven't received training in how to do that. And so one of the things is, for me, when I see something that's lacking and I complain about it, if I complain about it 3 times, I have to do something about it. And that's part of how I came to teach professional development on the FAIR Act and how teachers can do and implement that law in a way that's effective.
Things have changed on the federal level since 2016. We can keep it broad in that sense, right? Rollback of protections for transgender students has been proposed. Mm-hmm. What do you make of this?
Well, so I'm a trans guy, and I read the studies that come out. Last year, the U.S. Pediatrics Association came out with a study showing the suicide rates for transgender youth, and it was not a surprise to anyone who works with that population, and it is terrifying. So in that study, it showed that about 50% of transgender guys who are youth have attempted suicide, and numbers like that, to me, are a huge indicator of where we're falling short for our students. And if you look at those studies intersectionally, those numbers are higher if someone is Native or of various ethnic groups. And so we need to do more. Obviously, we need to do more when the rates are that high. And suicide rates for youth in this country are higher than they've ever been. I think it's 14% now. Right. And that's just the general population. When you start looking at that for subpopulations and disenfranchised groups, it goes upwards.
Not to mention 29 transgender Americans murdered in 2018.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and internationally over 300. So, and those are kind of on just the identified hate crimes, right? So there's certainly, the number is much higher than that. Yeah. And something that I'm aware of, and it's part of why I think it's important to talk about my experience, so that kids can see a future for themselves. When I transitioned, I figured it would be a positive thing in my life. I had no idea how amazing it would make me feel.
Really?
Yeah, and I want kids to know it gets better, right?
Yeah. I can't help but think you take pride in the fact that other students can look to you as the role model that you never had.
Yeah, I often imagine what my life would be like if I had known this was an option younger. And I am so impressed by the youth that I meet. In addition to being the superintendent of the school district, I also work at our local clinics, helping to facilitate the support group for transgender youth. So I have the opportunity to work with youth from other schools as well who are looking at transition or questioning. And they are so inspiring. And it's just such a gift to me to support them in their individual journeys.
The fact that you've come out now, does it change your philosophy as an educator at all? Are you more innovative? Does it allow you to see the whole student in a new sense? Or is that who you've always been as an educator?
I don't think those things have changed. What has changed is my level of self-filtering. I can be more fully self-expressed. I don't have to edit myself the same amount. So I can be more fully present to meet my students on a moment-to-moment basis because I'm not afraid of saying the wrong thing or outing myself or just saying something that's unexpected in a way that creates disharmony. Now I can just kind of express myself fully and celebrate that and draw on all of my experiences to support my students, and that feels amazing.
You spoke about it earlier, but I do want to talk about Peninsula Union School District as a whole because while we say your title is superintendent principal, it does not stop there. As you said, you're the HR coordinator. You are the school nurse at times. I saw you giving an inhaler to a student. Like, you have a lot of roles when we talk about a school district that has 41 kids.
I think a lot of people don't realize what it's like to work at a small school district. We have 41 students here at Peninsula Union from TK through 8th grade. And it feels very familial on some level because we're small enough to really know each other. You don't get lost in the crowd when your class has 13 students in it. And so there's a way that my role as superintendent principal includes all the things that superintendent principals have, and it includes a lot more too. And I really enjoy it. I didn't know schools like this were an option when I was growing up in schools with thousands. My high school had over 3,000. And to work at a school like this, it's very fun and engaging and dynamic. And yeah, if the cook is out sick, maybe I'm serving up some cereal in the kitchen, and it's fun to not know what the day has in store.
I would imagine not every superintendent in California is able to eat breakfast with his or her students in the morning. It's not a reality for most.
Well, and one huge factor is our cook, who's awesome. And so I feel very happy to eat the meals with the students. I like to just kind of sit with them and eat my breakfast with them and eat my lunch with them. And I eat what they eat. And we all eat really well.
You've been with the school district since 2016, is that correct?
Yes.
So let me ask this. Does the fact that you're now openly transgender hamper your upward mobility in your career? Not to say you're looking to leave Peninsula Union anytime soon, but if that day were to come, is there that fear?
So I have no idea how that's going to look because I came out at this job and I've been at this job ever since. I certainly hope that, it wouldn't hinder me. And I've talked to many transgender people who have felt like their being out and transgender has hindered them. People who are fully competent and qualified in their field and apply to hundreds of jobs before they get an interview. I certainly hope that won't be the case, if there ever is a time where I'm looking to move. That being said, I've never looked for a job as an out transgender person, and I'm not sure what that'll look like.
There's been a rise in transgender representation in the media. Laverne Cox, Chelsea Manning, Caitlyn Jenner come to mind. How has that affected the response that you've received?
Occasionally I'll have someone reference that, oh, yeah, I watched Caitlyn Jenner get interviewed or whatnot. But for the most part, actually, since so many humans just in our communities have come out as trans, usually people reference people they know. They say, oh, someone from my church transitioned or my friend's son transitioned. So usually it's more personal and less celebrities, at least in the experiences that I've had.
I want to ask this. What advice do you have for people, especially educational leaders, wanting to support trans kids? And we could spend an hour on this topic alone, but...
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big one.
Where do you start?
Well, I think it's really important to get the pronouns right. A lot of people make mistakes in pronouns, and it's okay. Like, I've made mistakes in pronouns. What matters is correcting it and putting in some time and effort to get it right. So, there's that. There's making sure that kids are being called by their preferred names. A lot of times on the roll sheet, there isn't an option for call this student this. So the first day of class, every single time the student gets outed. So, just having systems in place, also having posters around, demonstrating that gender diversity is an important and valued aspect of the school community, communicating that kids are safe, providing professional development for teachers so that they can be proactive about creating a safe place. Those are, a few of the things, but I mean, the list, there's plenty to do. I think just a basic level of education, it doesn't take long to learn the basics.
Lark, appreciate you taking the time. Appreciate you telling your story. It's an important one, and I think more people need to hear it. So we're very, very grateful to you for this.
Thank you. Thank you for coming all the way to Humboldt County.
Happy to do it. For more of the ACSA Speaker Series, just head over to our website, ACSA.org. Interviews with Marley Matlin, Frank DeAngelis, and many more. For everyone here at ACSA, I'm Michael Kelly. We'll see you next time.